Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Daria, for this nice introduction. I am outside of the academia, but I am a Master of Science in Risk, Crisis and Disaster Management, so I'm a Master of Disaster. But today we will discuss about the complex interplay of technology, culture and society, and I will touch upon this issue in a pan-Arctic manner within the next around 15 minutes, and we'll be happy to discuss with you during the reception at the City Hall this evening further on this. The Arctic holds a vast investment and business potential. Simultaneously, indigenous and local interests are a major part of the development. The Arctic cultures show the ancient nature of the Arctic area, and thus they play a significant role in Arctic developments. This intervention is being outlined for the 19th Aleksanteri Conference and my project as a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. It partially targets the following questions of the project. How can we ensure that the Arctic potential is developed with right selections and in a sustainable manner? How can we best inform the decision makers to ensure peace and stability in the Arctic, which is, I think, an important task for the whole academia, especially nowadays. And 3, how to urge climate actions which are most essential to the Arctic. And finally, what roles do different international coalitions and organizations play? Global interests in the Arctic have entered into a new level within the past, say, 10 years. 10 or 20 years ago, when we talked about the Arctic, not so many were actually interested, but now it's different. Protectionist acts of the United States, China, and Russia have slowed down many investments and projects. Geopolitical interests are growing stronger. Sanctions inhibit international technological and trade collaboration, and free trade talks have been replaced by acts of trade war with new customs fees. Do cultural dimensions promote technologies and investments? How can we ensure that the Arctic potential is developed with right choices? What to expect from the European Union? How can the Arctic cultures enhance international Arctic collaboration, or can they? Could we think of Arctic cultural diplomacy? In this context, could culture enhance improving business connections and peaceful developments? Industrialization has accelerated since the Finnish-born polar explorer Adolf Nordenskiöld navigated the Northern Sea route back in 1878. Digitalization is making progress on that area now, and the climate is warming with an alarming pace. These developments have really accelerated rapidly during the past 2 decades. We just noticed in the news today that 5 new islands had been found in the Russian Arctic, which have been covered by ice throughout centuries, but now they've been found within the past couple of weeks. And the temperatures in the Arctic area rise with a double or triple pace compared to other parts of the world. And this is mostly due to human activity outside the Arctic. The World Economic Forum has estimated that the Arctic investment potential is around $1 trillion. Approximately 15 to 20% of this investment opportunity lies in the Barents Euro-Arctic area. This inventory was just handed earlier this month from the Guggenheim partners who made this inventory for the World Economic Forum to the Woodrow Wilson Center Polar Program for exploring and developing it further, and now in a public institution. The Arctic Economic Council is a partner in the Business Index North project, which notes that activities directly connected to extraction, refining, energy transforming and harvesting of natural resources create 54% of all turnover in the area. Trade, shopping, culture and tourism create 30%, and finally services for businesses create around 15%. The BIN economy area reaches 94 billion euros, and furthermore, growth average at 5.5% annually during the last 3 years is well above the 3% of the national economies. So the developments in the Arctic area in terms of economical opportunities have been stronger in this area. However, simultaneously, the population of the area has dropped from 3.7 million to 3.6 million, whereas the biggest decrease is in the age group of under 20 years, claims the report. And there is also a significant gender inequality. Women, in average, occupy just below 10% of managerial positions in the area. There are great differences in the productivity and significance of the Arctic areas in different countries. On one hand, Russian Arctic provides more than 15, close to 20% of the country's GDP, and Lapland's productivity in Finland is on a nationally high level. 3% of our population lives in Lapland, but the export figures are close to 7 or 8%. In some countries and regions, the Arctic again is very poorly developed, with either a weak or practically non-existing infrastructure. Unemployment rates are high, social problems are very severe compared to the non-Arctic areas of these countries. For the Arctic's $1 trillion potential to be realized, international financial value chains are a must. A first ever memorandum of understanding by the Arctic Council was signed with the Arctic Economic Council last May in the sidelines of the ministerial meeting in Rovaniemi, promoting sustainable economic development, blue economy, maritime safety, telecommunications, education, scientific research, and traditional knowledge. And the Finnish chairmanships of the Arctic Council and the Arctic Economic Council ended, and Iceland took over, whereas Russia will be in the wheel in 2021. To put the requirements of the MOU forward, the Arctic Council and the Arctic Economic Council held a historical first ever collaborative one-day conference earlier this month in Reykjavik, Iceland. Chairmen and experts from respective working groups, as well as the leaderships, participated with more than 100 people in the room. The parties agreed upon working group collaboration and moving forward with many areas, like maritime issues, for instance. One of the collaborative areas is traditional knowledge, which certainly includes indigenous cultures in the Arctic. Actually, indigenous ways of life are sometimes conceptualized holistically as being the indigenous cultures. What Finnish linkages in terms of economical development exist in the Eurasian space? Firstly, Russia and China are important trade partners for Finland. The annual trade with Russia is around 13 billion euros and with China around 10 billion euros. Secondly, China's One Belt, One Road strategy emphasizes infrastructural investments in the area, including the Northern Sea Route, considered as the Ice Silk Road. China's One Belt, One Road strategy has created fears that it's a tool of power politics. China published its Arctic policy in winter 2018, acknowledging the following goals: to understand, protect, develop, and participate in the governance of the Arctic, safeguard the common interests of all countries and the international community, and promote sustainable development of the Arctic. But importantly, as said, the strategy also outlines China's willingness to participate and not just to observe the decision-making of the Arctic. China has a cooperation agreement with Russia on developing the Northern Sea Route and an interest in investing in transportation infrastructure, for example in Iceland and in Greenland. Some of those projects have been turned down by bringing in American last-minute funding to keep the Chinese investors out. An interesting piece of technological development in the Eurasian space is the telecommunication cable project between Europe and Asia along the Northern Sea Route. Finnish IT company Cinia and Russian mobile telecom service operator Megafon signed an MOU considering the project last June in the St. Petersburg International Economical Forum. The 10,000-kilometer fiber optic cable would speed up data communication between Europe and Asia, with a focus on the Eurasian region, and thus improve the Eurasian business collaboration. It may also help the Russian indigenous people's communication opportunities if the cable will be extended with fingers or arms, connecting it to the shore along the route on the Russian northern areas. Culture. Culture is powerful. Cultural diplomacy has been an influential tool of political targets. It has been used for political purposes in various manners. Famous ballet dancers of the Soviet Union era were some kind of ambassadors, but there were also other types of examples. For instance, a significant cultural artist like Rudolf Nureyev, for instance, wanted to send the world a message for a need of change. Yet importantly, culture unites nations internally and externally. And of course, it's ice hockey. For example, the first ice hockey gold medal to Finland in 1995 had a very positive influence for the spirit of the nation. Nowadays, Chinese and Finnish teams play ice hockey in the Russian KHL League in the Eurasian space. Indigenous peoples' cultures emerge in music, singing, dancing, painting, and storytelling, to name a few examples. They are often spiritual and describe their ways of life as part of the nature, Mother Earth. According to Mililani Trask, the cultural heritage of indigenous peoples cannot be separated into component parts, like scientific, spiritual, artistic, and so on. It should be regarded as a single, integrated, and interdependent whole. All aspects are equal and require equal respect and protection. Similarly, indigenous peoples do not see protection of their rights to their cultures as separate from territorial rights and their right of self-determination. Sociologist Mary Douglas developed the cultural theory in the 1960s as a neutral instrument where the morphology of societies could be compared, irrespectively of their existence of time and space. According to the theory, perceived risk is also closely tied to cultural adherence and social learning. Depending on whether one is socially participating and which one of the four theoretical groups or ways of life one belongs to, one will focus on different kinds of risks. And these four groups, according to this theory, are egalitarian, fatalist, hierarchist, and individual. And different groups have different ways of perception of their existence and risks. People choose what to fear and how much to fear it. And this is actually a very important finding considering indigenous societies. Cultural theory aims at explaining how people perceive and act upon the world around them. More specifically, the theory claims that it is largely determined by social aspects and cultural adherence. According to Wildavsky and Dake, the cultural theory of risk is capable to predict and explain what kind of people will perceive which potential hazards to be and how dangerous they are. Hence, a study or research program considering these ways of life among indigenous peoples, considering the Arctic, would be very interesting. And this brings us to my master's thesis close to 20 years ago, where the cultural theory was partially overthrown. The perception of risk did not emerge among different groups of employees as the theory suggested. I will make a proposal on this in the conclusion. As the European Union is expected to renew its Arctic policy, freedom of trade should be the main target of the economical part. Trade barriers slow down the use of best technologies and services endangering sustainable development. The main target of the Arctic Investment Protocol, the coordination and execution of which has been transferred from the World Economic Forum to the Arctic Economic Council. The EU Arctic policy notes that the European part of the Arctic also has significant potential to support growth for the rest of Europe. However, as the EU does not currently have a complete north-south traffic connection, it could explore the merits of strengthening links to the Arctic through trans-European networks, for example, from Finland to Norway, providing access to the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Rail Link would connect the Arctic Ocean to the Baltic Sea, and possibly with the Helsinki-Tallinn Tunnel even further to the Central Europe, to the European TEN-T network. This initiative recently took a step forward when Finnish Finest Bay Development and Norwegian Sydvaranger Development companies signed an MOU considering this issue. And finally, conclusions and recommendations. As Finland is currently chairing the European Union and Russia is well on the way of preparing its forthcoming Arctic Council chairmanship starting 2021, There is a great opportunity for outlining a strong pan-Arctic goals in the Eurasian context. Perhaps an international institute could take an influential role on this. A second area for further research in the Arctic and Eurasian indigenous context is that the indigenous people's perceptions and fears lead to certain behaviors among them and how they address the society, including its developments and investments. Hence, these also influence the business potentials. This would be considered as a potential future research area as well. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to discuss this further with over a drink tonight. Thank you.